That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent them over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. The man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So we have this question, do I walk with a limp? And Jeff, would you please tell us what that's all about?
Thanks everybody for joining us today for our Family on Mission gathering. I so appreciate spending time going through these stories of our faith from Genesis. They just keep reminding us of our journey and of the journey of others that have gone before us. Over the last couple of weeks, we've spent a lot of time talking about the journey of Abram and Sarai, who became Abraham and Sarah, about the promise that was given to them and how that promise was multiplied through their son, through Isaac and Rebekah. And now we're continuing into the story of Jacob. A couple of weeks ago, when we gathered, we talked specifically about Jacob's encounter with God. And we had mentioned about how in many ways he had heard the faith from his fathers, but now his faith was becoming very personal with his own encounters with God. And we see a lot more of that today. In the encounter that we had a couple of weeks ago, Jacob started to recognize that God was present even though he had not seen him. And as a direct result, he renamed some of the places because it helped him to understand the significance of where God was meeting him where he was. The faith of his fathers became very personal for Jacob. And we see that a lot today. Now, this text is one that I particularly appreciate because I think it is something that I can even recognize, I guess, as my own particular journey, and maybe you can see yourself in it as well. Now, we skipped over a couple of important verses. And so just to set a little bit of context about this, we need to understand that in the first 21 verses, there's a lot of reflection of Jacob as he's about to encounter his brother. Now, if you know anything about the history of Jacob and his brother Esau, it was a little bit of a sibling rivalry. It was a sibling rivalry of biblical proportions. Started at their birth, whenever he actually came out holding onto the heel of his brother. He then bargained and from Esau received the birthright in exchange for a meal. Now Jacob was a little bit sly, and in fact, at the time of blessing, Jacob dressed up like his brother and received the blessing that was intended for the firstborn. There was a lot going on here that set the poles, the opposing forces, if you will, for this encounter that is just about to happen. And so, as a matter of fact, it's just really interesting that in verse 20, and let me just see if I can find it here. In verse 20, Jacob is trying to prepare himself for this encounter with Esau, and this is what it says. Whenever you go, he sends out his servants with a gift for Esau. And he says, when you go, be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming. He's coming behind us. And then it says, kind of as a comment, for he thought, I will pacify Esau with these gifts that I am sending on ahead. And later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. Perhaps he will be a little bit more open instead of hostile to the reunion of these brothers that have had so much difficulty in their previous journey. Verse 21, so Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. So this is the setting for the text that was read for us early on. And what we see here is we see that Jacob, in his rest, encounters someone, it says a man, that he can, and this man cannot overpower him, cannot overpower Jacob. And so as a direct result, he touches and dislodges his hip from its socket. Pretty significant wrestling, wouldn't you say? Whether you imagine this as a dream, whether you imagine this as a challenging sleepless night in preparation for what is to come the next morning, there is a lot that is taking shape in this encounter. And when the encounter is finished, Jacob is renamed, just as the places that he's encountered have been renamed in the past because of his connection with God. All of a sudden here, Jacob, just as Abram had been renamed Abraham, Jacob is now being renamed as Israel. Jacob calls this place Peniel. And we'll talk about what that means in just a moment. And it says that he arose the next morning, and as he passed by Peniel, he was limping. He was limping because of his hip. This is an encounter that leaves a mark. Not only has Jacob's journey of faith become personal, it's now on display. It's on display in everything that he does, and everywhere that he goes, in his gait, in his movement. Just as Jacob has renamed the place of his early encounter Bethel, which means this is the house of God, this place is now Peniel, where it says he encountered the face of God. This is up close and personal. Not only do the places change, or the names of the places change, but Jacob himself is changed. The name Jacob means to follow, or to be behind, or to supplant, or to circumvent, or to assail. One definition is it's a reflection of somebody overreaching their area of territory. And the story in Genesis has talked about this movement of the supplanter between Jacob and Esau. Esau, the one whom Jacob is about to meet, remembers undoubtedly that Jacob had supplanted him of his birthright. This is probably an anxious time for Jacob. And in this encounter, Jacob, the supplanter, the one who overreaches, is now recognized in a different way because of the change that's going on in him, within him. He is now renamed Israel. Different name. It means God contended, or wrestles with God, or triumphant with God. Jacob struggled. Jacob struggled with man and with God. And he who has struggled with God and with humans is now the one who has overcome. It's a powerful story. It's a powerful experience. It's a powerful encounter of the journey. Jacob is now and forevermore Israel. The journey that he has had has left a mark. His encounter with God has left a mark. He bore the physical signs of the covenant of God, the covenant that was given through Abraham, beneath his undergarments. But now he carries a different mark of the covenant that is displayed for everybody to see. Now, today's question, which I gave to everybody in advance, I hope you've been reflecting on this. Do I walk with a limp? And so I want you to think about that for yourself. Do you walk with a limp? Another way to say it is, to what degree has your journey of faith, changed you? I'm reminded of a book that came out more than a decade ago by Tom Brokaw. It was about the greatest generation. And he named 5 characteristics of what we could learn from those who went before us, who were changed because of their journey. Now, this is a summary. I'll gladly send this out to you, but here are the 5 characteristics that he named and some of the points that were identified. The first one was this generation, the greatest generation that was shaped by the World War and the Great Depression. They were a generation of personal responsibility. We live in an age of blame. If we can't find someone at fault for our trials, we will just invent something. It's a terribly destructive pattern, not only for personal growth, but to the national health and to our entire country and the world. To be given responsibility is an honor and was seen as such during the time of the Great Generation. Great lessons of leadership always start with a deep sense of personal responsibility. Characteristic number 1. Number 2, this generation was demonstrating on an ongoing basis humility. In that day, there was an expected norm of dignity and modesty. Society held itself to a high standard, and humility was at the heart of our individual and our national character. Our overall behavioral norm today, I think, could benefit greatly by taking a cue from those before us who humbled themselves and who demonstrated humble hearts on an ongoing basis. Characteristic number 2. Number 3, work ethic. One of the hardest things for myself as a parent and for all of us is to instill in our children and our grandchildren today is the concept, the commitment to hard work. At the time of the Great Generation, of course, work was not an option. Everyone worked to survive, both personally and as a country. They took deep pride in that work as well. Thankfully, we're not in a world war today. And technology has lightened the load on many of us. And we've become very prosperous and very safe, even though we are experiencing challenge that has never been seen before in this particular season. I believe that there is a significant thing that we can all learn from the importance of ongoing work, committing yourself to whatever it is that you have promised to one another. Work ethic and caring and demonstrating that on a daily basis is a significant mark of the greatest generation. That was number 3. Number 4, prudence, or another way to say it in particular economic terms is prudent saving. In the 30s and 40s, everyone was saved down to the last penny and the very last green bean in the pantry. To be frugal was a discipline. It was a mark of the day. In this century, particularly in this season, and I talk about this often in the church, is we have a tendency to be consumer-oriented as opposed to being producer-oriented. We fill our lives with one temporary service or gadget, and then whenever we've completed it, we discard it and we move on to the next. And it goes on so fast that there is really not even a need for a repairman anymore. What's happened? Why are things so different? We seem to just have the idea of put it out by the trash, it'll get picked up, and then I'll just get a new one. This type of thinking is one of the marks that I think we could learn from the great generation. That was number 4. The last one, which I think is significant for us in this reflection, is faithfulness. Or maybe another way to say it is faithful commitment. Is love enough to sustain a marriage? It's It's a question that is identified in the book. Does loyalty count for anything? Or should we constantly be on the lookout for the next green pasture? Another question. The third question, is commitment valued in our society? And is a man or a woman's word considered gold? A third question. It's identified that one of the significant things of the greatest generation is to recognize whether or not we keep our commitments. The difference between the greatest generation and the generation of today, in many ways, I think, according to the writer, comes down to the answering of those three questions, and perhaps many more. The greatest generation, the 5 commitments or characteristics that were identified: responsibility, humility, work ethic, prudence or prudent saving, and faithfulness, in particular in the keeping of our commitments. I wonder, what will be said about our generation? Are we being changed as Jacob was in the text today? Are we being changed in our encounters with human beings and with God? What will be the impact of our gait? What is the demonstration of our walk and of our character and competency? What will be written in decades to come about this generation? I shared a few weeks ago a picture, and this definitely gets into the idea of the personal journey, which I know each and every one of us has. And during this particular picture, I put out there this is an example that I've continued to reflect on of me, as someone shared, in a position of prayer with an eye watching over me as I was facing outward. And then there was just these simple words, look closer. If you've been journeying along with the daily devotions, you know that I'm not hesitating to tell people what I'm sensing in these particular days. I'm also not hesitating to invite others to help me. One, because I long hearing God's voice through those who are also listening to God, who I respect, who often can help me to hear things that I might not be hearing myself. Second thing is I also value this kind of discussion because it helps me to reflect from a different point of view on the encounters that we're all experiencing and that I'm personally experiencing in this season of faith. There's an importance, there's a significance that's coming out. I'll just share this one point from my journey, from my journal a couple of weeks ago. I had written that it was a very significant day where I felt like, maybe slightly different, but maybe not too unlike Jacob encountering God in the form of whether it was a dream or a wrestling match, however you want to refer to the text. But this particular day, there were a number of things that just kept coming forward that I wrote into my journal. I noted it reflected the importance of letting others lead, giving them a chance to do things that maybe they haven't done in the past. Perhaps they might fumble it, but perhaps it's an opportunity for them to figure out how God is using them. It's an opportunity potentially for us all to fail forward as we experience life together, whether it's in the church, whether it's in a time of coaching, or whether it's in our journey with our neighbors. I also heard one of the people say, Jeff, you've talked about this eye that is watching you, with this kind of position of you facing out, with the words, look closer. This point came forward that in some ways, this is like taking a night hike. My wife and I just had some time away the last week, and we did a lot of hiking. But we always chose to hike during the day, in particular in the early part of the day, because we knew that thunderstorms would often roll in the afternoon here in the mountains. But what I was starting to understand in my conversations with others, that this particular season that all of us are in is like going on a night hike. You might not choose to do it, but you still move. You move forward, perhaps a little more slowly, a little more cautiously, and you're constantly focusing on where the light is right in front of you, indicating you should take your next step. Look closer. Look closer, Jeff. Look closer at the next step. And for all of us, keep your eyes right in front of you on where the light is shining. One of the people said, Jeff, that phrase, look closer, you realize how significant that is maybe in this year. I mean, it is the year of 2020, right? And I don't know, maybe you haven't thought about this before. It kind of was even a recollection for me. This is the year of 2020 vision. What a year. Wouldn't we all like to have 2020 vision? I remember just a few years ago, I had surgery. And so whenever I take off my glasses, I now, for the first time in decades, have 2020 vision again, at least for long distances. But it really got my attention that I need to put on spectacles to be able to read the things that are right in front of me. This is a year of perfect vision for us all, where we just need to keep our eyes on the path that's being illuminated. Finally, on this same day, one of the people who I was working with, a pastor that I've really come to appreciate as a dear friend, she had shared about what she was sensing and the journey of faith that she was encountering in her own congregation. And as she talked, this picture came to mind as she's been trying to offer, encouragement, faithful obedience, and to try to herself experience peace in this season. And here's the picture that came to mind. She says, I feel like I'm in a season of frenzied activity where I'm a turtle swimming in a small little kiddie pool. I need to just keep swimming and be calm. Oh, by the way, the kiddie pool is sitting on the yellow lines in the middle of a 2-lane highway. This is what her journey is like as she's trying to encourage people, challenge people, invite people to take forward steps of faith, to pick up the responsibilities that are right in front of them, while at the same time abiding all the time. Look closer. Keep your eye on where God's light is shining. Finally, some passages of scripture. Just as Jacob himself, who is now Israel, was experiencing things, words helped to encourage him forward. The words of his father, of his grandfather, and the words of the faith, they speak to us, I think, in this season. And in particular, I think in this day for me, in a way that are particularly relevant. Someone shared this passage with me from Psalm 138. I will bow down toward your holy temple and will praise your name for your unfailing love and your faithfulness. For you have so exalted your solemn decree that it surpasses your fame. Though the Lord is exalted, he looks kindly on the lowly. Though lofty, he sees them from afar. And these words are particularly relevant for me. The Lord will perfect that which concerns me. Lord, I just lay these things before you, and I ask you to take the things that this recovering perfectionist is trying to understand, and that you will perfect those things for us in your timing and in your way. A few more. Another psalm. This is from Psalm 14. The Lord looks down from heaven on the human race to see if there is one who is wise, one who seeks God. And then finally from 2 Chronicles chapter 16. The Lord looks out for the whole earth. He gives strength to those who commit their lives. Completely underlined. who commit their lives completely to him. Are you being changed in this season? Do you walk with a limp? I hope so. I hope and pray, as I think about times with my own children and of the grandchildren that I have not yet met, that that generation will look back not only at me, but at us, and will recognize the character that God has formed in us, and the competency, the skill, the patience, the perseverance, the faithfulness that has been formed in us because we have wrestled with these days, and we have wrestled inviting God to be a part of the journey. How about you? Do you walk with a limp? I sure hope so. And I pray that we will limp more and more in the days, the weeks, the months, and in the generation to come.